I need a caregiver, Ms. Lee, not a hero. Michael Carter's voice sliced through the oak-paneled study, his wheelchair stationed behind a vintage desk that likely cost more than Emily's yearly income. I've had 7 caregivers in the past year. What makes you think you'll last? Emily kept her gaze steady, though her nails pressed into her palms beneath the desk. Respectfully, Mr. Carter, I'm not here to save anyone. I'm a registered nurse with 8 years of experience in spinal cord injury care. I'm here because I excel at my job and the pay is good. His eyebrow lifted slightly, betraying his surprise at her bluntness. The estate manager, Mrs. Thompson, shifted uneasily beside her. Your resume says you left Chicago General 6 months ago. Michael continued, sliding the paper across his desk smoothly. Why? The hospital's night shift didn't work for me as a single mother. Emily paused, choosing her words carefully. My son, Liam, is 8. He needs me present, not just awake. Michael's fingers tapped against his wheelchair's armrest, the only movement below his chest. The job requires living here 5 days a week. What about your son? Liam would stay with me during school breaks. Otherwise, he'd split time between here and my mother's house, which is closer to his school. Emily leaned forward slightly. We've already talked about it. He understands. Does he? There was something unreadable in his expression. Kids rarely understand sacrifice. Mine does. Emily's voice stayed calm, though she felt warmth rising in her cheeks. But this isn't about sacrifice, Mr. Carter. It's about opportunity. You need someone qualified who won't quit when things get tough. I need a salary that will give my son better options than I had. It's a business arrangement, nothing more. Mrs. Thompson cleared her throat. The job involves extensive physical care, including bathing, physical therapy assistance, and I've read the requirements, Emily interrupted, keeping her eyes on Michael. I've handled more challenging cases. What I haven't encountered is an employer who's gone through 7 caregivers in 12 months. So, maybe, Mr. Carter, the real question is, what are you looking for that these professionals couldn't provide? The silence that followed was charged. Michael studied her with the intensity she imagined he once used to evaluate business deals. Finally, he wheeled himself around the desk until he was directly in front of her. What I need, Ms. Lee, is someone who will do their job without trying to fix my life. Someone who won't whisper about how tragic it is that a 38-year-old entrepreneur ended up in a wheelchair. Someone who won't treat me like I'm fragile or suggest miracle cures. Emily stood, matching his directness. What you need is a nurse who remembers you're her employer, not her patient. Someone who can handle the physical demands of the job while maintaining professional boundaries. I can be that person, Mr. Carter. The question is, can you be the kind of employer who lets me do my job without assuming I have an agenda? For the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. You start Monday. Mrs. Thompson will handle the paperwork. He turned his wheelchair back toward the window. A clear dismissal. Don't make me regret this, Ms. Lee. Emily grabbed her bag, her heart racing despite her calm exterior. As she followed Mrs. Thompson out, she heard his voice one last time. And Ms. Lee, tell your son the library here has an excellent collection of science books. He might find them useful when he visits. Emily closed the door behind her, exhaling shakily. She had the job. Now she just had to convince herself she could handle whatever came next. But why can't you just drive home every night? Liam's voice wavered as he pushed his peas around his plate. The small kitchen in their apartment felt even more cramped than usual, the flickering overhead light casting uneven shadows across their dinner table. Because Mr. Carter needs 24-hour care, sweetie, Emily reached across to still her son's restless hand. And this job pays enough for us to finally get you into that science camp you've been talking about? Liam's eyes lit up briefly before dimming again. The one with that's the one. Emily forced a smile, though the camp's $3,000 price tag still made her stomach clench, plus guitar lessons if you still want them. The pile of bills on the counter seemed to mock her promise. Last month's medical insurance premium was already overdue, and the refrigerator made an ominous rattling sound that probably meant another repair bill soon. Is he nice? Liam asked, finally taking a bite of his dinner. Emily thought back to Michael Carter's piercing gaze. He's professional, and his house has a huge library. Better than the school library. Much better. And he said you can use it when you visit. Liam pushed his plate away, his face taking on the serious expression that made him look so much older than 8. But I'll only see you on weekends. And school breaks, Emily added quickly. You'll stay with Grandma during the week. She already said you could have your own space in her craft room. The one with the weird doll collection. Emily laughed, despite herself. We'll move those somewhere else. She stood to clear the dishes, but Liam grabbed her hand. Mom, promise you won't forget about me when you're taking care of him. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. She knelt beside her son's chair, forcing Liam to meet her eyes. Listen to me. Everything I do, every single day, is for you. This job is no different. You are my priority. Always. Even with a billionaire boss? Especially then. Emily tucked a strand of hair behind Liam's ear. Besides, someone needs to keep his ego in check. Did you see the size of that house? Definitely compensating for something. Mom, Liam giggled, the tension finally breaking. Later, after Liam was asleep, Emily sat at their second-hand kitchen table, counting bills. The acceptance letter from Carter's estate manager lay beside her, the salary figure almost too good to be true. It would mean missing bedtimes, school plays, morning hugs, but it would also mean no more choosing between guitar lessons and new shoes, between science camp and car repairs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Thompson. Contract attached, start Monday, 7 a.m. sharp. Emily signed the contract electronically, each click of her mouse feeling like another promise she couldn't afford to break. As she passed Liam's room on her way to bed, she paused in the doorway. Her son slept clutching the robotics magazine he'd been saving up to subscribe to. Just a few years, Emily whispered to herself, just until we're stable. But as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the memory of Michael Carter's words. Kids rarely understand sacrifice. She had a feeling she was about to learn exactly what he meant. Arms up, Emily directed, her professional tone masking her awareness of Michael's clenched jaw. It was their first morning together, and the tension in his master bathroom was thick enough to cut with a "I can manage the shirt," he said tersely, though his fingers fumbled with the buttons. Emily stepped back, giving him space while staying close enough to assist. Of course, I'll prepare your shower items. The bathroom was a masterpiece of accessible design, with sleek grab bars that looked more like modern art than medical equipment. Everything spoke of money carefully spent to maintain the illusion of independence. The water temperature, he began, 98 degrees, pressure at medium, handheld shower head on the pulse setting, Emily interrupted, reading from his care plan. And yes, I know about the specialized shampoo for preventing scalp irritation. Michael's hands stilled on his shirt. You actually read that 30-page document? Twice. It's my job. She turned to face him. Now, would you prefer to transfer to the shower chair yourself? Or would you like assistance? A muscle twitched in his jaw. Myself. Emily watched as he positioned his wheelchair, locked the brakes, and began the transfer. His upper body strength was impressive. Clearly, he hadn't neglected his physical therapy. But halfway through the transfer, his grip slipped. Without hesitation, Emily stepped in, providing just enough support to prevent a fall. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she saw something flicker there. Embarrassment, frustration, and beneath it all, fear. Good catch, he said, quietly. Good technique, she replied, helping him settle into the shower chair, though your left grip seemed weaker. Have you been overcompensating with your right side? He looked surprised at her observation. How did you... 8 years of experience, remember? Plus, your left deltoid is slightly less developed. She adjusted the shower settings. We should add some specific exercises to your physical therapy routine. For the first time, Michael smiled slightly. Are you always this observant? Only when I'm being paid to be. Emily handed him the handheld shower head. Now, would you like to start with the shampoo, or should I remind you of that part of your care plan too? The rest of the morning routine went more smoothly. Emily maintained her professional distance, while Michael gradually relaxed, accepting her help with less resistance. By the time she helped him into his suit for a video conference, they had established a tentative rhythm. "Your schedule shows a 2-hour meeting," Emily said, adjusting his tie. "I'll use that time to familiarize myself with the house and emergency protocols." Mrs. Thompson usually brings coffee at the 1-hour mark, Michael mentioned, positioning his wheelchair in front of his desk. "I know. Page 17 of the care plan. But I make better coffee." Emily moved toward the door. "And I already noticed you prefer it stronger than what she brings. How did you? The coffee maker in your kitchen has a darker residue than it should for the standard brewing instructions." She said, "Mr. Carter, being observant is my job." As she closed the door, Emily heard him chuckle for the first time. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. First day, first major hurdle cleared. Only about 1,000 more to go. Her phone vibrated. A text from Liam. "Hope your first day is good. Love you, Mom." Emily smiled, typing back a quick response before straightening her uniform. Time to learn every inch of this mansion. After all, for the next 5 days, it was home. "Piano Concerto number 23, Michael said suddenly, breaking the methodical silence of his evening bath routine. Emily paused in adjusting the water temperature. "Excuse me? The piece you're humming, Mozart's Piano Concerto number 23 in A major, second movement." His voice carried a hint of challenge, as if daring her to deny it. She hadn't even realized she was humming. "The Adagio. You know it. I wanted to be a pianist before reality intervened." Emily resumed her task, checking the water's temperature with practiced efficiency. "Though I doubt Mozart intended it to be hummed during a sponge bath," a ghost of amusement crossed his face. "And what did reality have to say about your musical aspirations? That single mothers don't get to spend 10 hours a day practicing Chopin." She helped him position his wheelchair next to the bath chair. "Ready for the transfer?" Michael gripped the support bars, muscles tensing. "Did you play well? Well enough to know I'd never play well enough." Emily supported his transfer with practiced ease. "My teacher said I had technical skill but lacked passion." She was being kind. "I doubt that." Michael settled into the bath chair, his business facade slipping slightly as the warm water eased his muscles. "The way you hummed it, there was understanding there." Emily focused on her task, maintaining professional distance despite the unexpected intimacy of their conversation. "Understanding doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Carter. Besides, Liam has more talent in his little finger than I ever had." "The piano in the living room," he said after a moment. "It hasn't been touched since the accident. You should use it." "That wouldn't be appropriate." "Why not? It's gathering dust and you're here 5 days a week." His tone was casual, but his eyes were watching her carefully. "Unless you're afraid your playing might disappoint a paraplegic entrepreneur," Emily met his gaze directly. "No, I'm afraid it might give my employer the wrong impression about our professional relationship." Michael was quiet as she finished washing his back. "And what impression would that be? That I'm here for anything other than my paycheck." She handed him the soap for the parts he could manage himself. "We both know how that story ends, Mr. Carter. I've read your care plan, remember? 7 caregivers in 12 months. Each one probably thought they could be the one to break down your walls." His jaw tightened. "And you don't?" "I'm here to do my job, not write a hallmark." Emily checked her watch. "Your physical therapist will be here in 30 minutes. Would you like to finish up yourself? Or do you need assistance?" Michael studied her for a long moment. "You know, Ms. Lee, most people find my walls intimidating. Most people aren't being paid to climb them." She handed him a towel. "They're just walls, Mr. Carter. I've seen better." As she helped him dress afterward, the silence between them felt different. Not comfortable exactly, but no longer brittle with unspoken tensions. Just as she finished buttoning his shirt, he spoke again. "The piano. Use it when I'm in meetings. Consider it part of your break time." Emily opened her mouth to refuse, but he continued. "That's not a request for intimacy, Ms. Lee. It's a recognition that wasted talent is its own kind of tragedy." She thought of Liam, of guitar lessons and science camps, and opportunities she'd never had. "I'll consider it." "Good." He wheeled himself toward the door. "And Ms. Lee, next time you hum Mozart while bathing me, at least get the tempo right." Emily waited until he was gone before allowing herself a small smile. Perhaps there was hope for both of them yet. Mrs. Thompson is sick, Emily said into her phone, pacing the kitchen at 5:30 a.m. My mother's out of town visiting my aunt, and I can't find a last-minute sitter. Through the speaker, Michael's voice remained maddeningly calm. Bring him. Mr. Carter, I don't think. Ms. Lee, your shift starts in 90 minutes. Either bring your son or waste more time finding alternatives that don't exist. Emily glanced at Liam, who sat at their kitchen table still in his pajamas, shoveling cereal into his mouth while reading a dog-eared copy of A Brief History of Time. He'll need to bring his schoolwork, Emily said finally. The library has adequate study space. A pause. And Ms. Lee, don't be late. The call ended before she could respond. 2 hours later, Liam stood in Michael Carter's study, staring openly at his wheelchair while he pretended not to notice. Emily fought the urge to intervene, knowing any attempt to shush her son would only make things more awkward. Is that a permeable F5? Liam asked suddenly. Michael looked up from his laptop, surprise briefly crossing his features. It is. How did you know? I did my science project on assistive technologies. Liam moved closer, his initial shyness forgotten. Does it really have memory seating positions? Can you control it with your phone? What's the battery life like? Emily watched as Michael's professional mask cracked slightly. Would you like me to show you? Can I? Liam bounced on his toes. Mom, can I? Your schoolwork first, Emily said firmly. Mr. Carter has meetings. Actually, Michael interjected, closing his laptop. My first meeting isn't for an hour. Plenty of time for a demonstration. That is, if it's all right with your mother. Emily recognized the dangerous territory they were entering, but Liam's face was so hopeful, and Michael's expression held none of his usual guardedness. 30 minutes, she conceded, then homework. What followed was a surprisingly thorough technical explanation of the wheelchair's capabilities. Michael showed Liam the control panel, explained the different seating positions, and even demonstrated the standing function that allowed him to reach higher shelves. The app interface lets me adjust settings remotely, he explained, holding out his phone. See these preference menus? Liam leaned in, fascinated. So you could theoretically hack it. Liam, Emily exclaimed. But Michael laughed, actually laughed for the first time since Emily had known him. Technically, yes, though it would void the warranty. Are you interested in programming? He's taking coding classes online, Emily said, surprising herself by joining the conversation when he can pry my laptop away from me. The library computer is free most afternoons, Michael said casually, for homework purposes, of course. Liam's eyes lit up. Really? Mom, can I? Homework first, Emily and Michael said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. Later, after Liam was settled in the library with his schoolwork, Emily brought Michael his mid-morning coffee. Thank you, she said quietly, for being kind to him. He's a remarkable child. Michael took a sip of coffee, nodding appreciatively at the strength. He sees the chair as technology to be understood, not a tragedy to be pitted. It's refreshing. Emily straightened his desk items with practiced efficiency. He sees a lot of things that way. Sometimes I worry he sees too much. Like mother, like son, Michael murmured, almost too quietly to hear. Emily pretended she hadn't heard, maintaining their careful professional distance. But as she left his study, she couldn't help but wonder if the walls they'd both built were quite as impenetrable as they'd thought. Emily found the darkroom by accident. She'd been checking the mansion's emergency exits, a weekly security protocol, when she noticed a door that wasn't on the house plans. The handle turned easily under her touch, revealing a space frozen in time. You shouldn't be in here. Michael's voice from behind made her jump. I apologize. Emily turned to face him, noting how his knuckles had whitened on his wheelchair's armrests. It wasn't on the floor plan, and security protocols require. It's not part of your responsibility. His voice was tight, controlled. Please close the door. But Emily had already seen too much. The professional cameras still mounted at wheelchair height. The specialized equipment adapted for limited mobility use. The half-finished projects abandoned mid-process. These are extraordinary, she said, gesturing to the photographs that lined the walls. Black and white cityscapes, architectural studies, portraits that captured raw human emotion. They're irrelevant. Michael moved forward, positioning his chair to block the doorway. The room needs to be cleared out. I've been meaning to tell Mrs. Thompson. Why? The question hung between them, dangerous in its simplicity. Because I can't use the equipment anymore. His voice was cold. Or had you failed to notice my condition? Emily crossed her arms. I noticed the modified tripod mounts, the adjusted camera grips, the remote shutter releases. Someone put a lot of thought into making this room accessible. Someone wasted their time. Did they? Emily moved to one of the mounted cameras, examining it. These modifications look custom. Expensive. You didn't give up easily, did you? Michael's laugh was bitter. What exactly do you think you're doing, Ms. Lee? My job. She met his gaze steadily, which includes understanding why my employer went through 7 caregivers in 12 months. This room tells me more than your care plan ever could. Does it? His voice was dangerous now. Please enlighten me. It tells me you're not just grieving the loss of mobility. Emily gestured to the photographs. You're grieving the loss of your art. And instead of adapting, you've locked it away like this room, like yourself. The silence that followed was deafening. Get out. His words were quiet but sharp. The camera settings are still functional. She continued as if he hadn't spoken. The autofocus works perfectly. The remote controls. Get out. No. Emily stood her ground. You can fire me if you want, but first, tell me why you really abandoned this room. Michael wheeled forward suddenly, his chair stopping inches from her. Because every time I try to shoot, my hands shake, because I can't move quickly enough to catch the right moment. Because the angles I used to achieve are physically impossible now. Because he stopped breathing hard. Because it's harder. Emily finished softly. Not impossible. Just harder. The fight seemed to drain out of him. Why do you care? I don't. Not personally. Emily moved past him to the door. But I'm paid to help you maintain your quality of life, Mr. Carter. In this room, she gestured to the space around them. This was clearly part of that life. She paused at the threshold. I'll leave the door unlocked. You know, in case you need to check the emergency exits yourself. As she walked away, she heard him whisper something that sounded like, thank you. But she was already too far down the hall to be sure. And some things were better left unacknowledged. Mom, I'm going to fail. Liam's voice crackled through Emily's phone. The circuit board won't work. And the science fair is tomorrow. And breathe, sweetie. Emily glanced at the clock, 9:45 p.m. She was supposed to be finishing Michael's evening routine, not dealing with a science project crisis. What exactly isn't working? The LED lights keep burning out. And I don't know why. And Grandma doesn't understand electronics. And your son sounds distressed. Michael commented from his bed, where Emily had been helping him with his night stretches. Emily covered the phone's microphone. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I can call him back after. Put him on video chat. On the big screen, he gestured to the wall-mounted television. Emily hesitated. That's not necessary. Miss Lee. His voice was firm. Put him on screen. Minutes later, Liam's tearful face filled the television, his failed circuit board project visible in front of him. You've got the resistor backwards, Michael said immediately. Liam's eyes widened. Mr. Carter, show me the circuit again. He leaned forward in his bed, professional demeanor forgotten. Yes, there. The stripe band should face the other direction. For the next 30 minutes, Emily watched as Michael guided Liam through troubleshooting his project. He explained current flow, demonstrated proper LED orientation. Using a diagram, he had Emily pull up on his tablet and walked Liam through each connection. Now try it, he instructed. Liam flipped the switch. The LED lights blinked in perfect sequence. I did it, he bounced in his chair. Mom, look. Mr. Carter, it worked. Of course it worked. You built it. Michael's voice carried an unfamiliar warmth, though next time, maybe start the troubleshooting before 10 p.m. Liam had the grace to look sheepish. Sorry, but could there be a next time? Maybe when I'm there for my visit. You know so much about electronics, and Liam, Emily warned, seeing the flash of discomfort cross Michael's face, but he surprised her. The library computer has some excellent circuit simulation software. We could look at it. If your mother approves. Emily felt caught between professional boundaries and maternal instinct. We shouldn't impose. It's not an imposition. Michael met her eyes. Consider it payment for all the Mozart you've been butchering during my bath times. Liam giggled. Mom, you've been singing to him. Humming, Emily corrected, feeling heat rise in her cheeks, and apparently doing it badly. Terribly, Michael agreed, but his eyes were smiling. And now, Liam, tell me more about your project. What made you choose this particular circuit design? As Liam launched into an enthusiastic explanation, Emily watched Michael's face. The rigid mask he usually wore had softened, replaced by genuine interest and something else, something that looked dangerously like contentment. Later, after Liam had signed off, and Emily was helping Michael settle for the night, he spoke quietly. He reminds me of myself at that age. Before I got caught up in venture capital and quarterly reports, Emily adjusted his pillows. You mean before you started building walls? Careful, Miss Lee. But there was no bite in his warning. Your professionalism is slipping. So is yours. She moved to turn off the lights. Thank you for helping him. Emily, he rarely used her first name. Leave the circuit software tutorial up on the library computer tomorrow, just in case. She smiled in the darkness. Good night, Mr. Carter. Good night, Miss Lee. Try not to hum in your sleep. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Michael's home office as Emily entered with his afternoon medication. She paused in the doorway, surprised to find him engaged in what appeared to be an animated video call. Your revenue projections are solid, he was saying, but your accessibility features need work. The interface isn't compatible with most screen readers, and the navigation assumes users have fine motor control. Emily placed his pills and water quietly beside him, trying not to disturb the meeting. But she couldn't help noticing the screen filled with young faces, all hanging on Michael's every word. But we didn't design it for disabled users, one of them protested. Then you've excluded 15% of your potential market. Michael's voice carried the sharp edge she recognized from their early interactions. Pull up your UI mock-ups. Let me show you something. For the next 20 minutes, Emily pretended to organize his desk while watching him methodically deconstruct and rebuild their design. His expertise was evident, but it was his passion that caught her attention, something she hadn't seen since discovering the photography room. After the call ended, she couldn't help herself. That was different. Different? He raised an eyebrow, swallowing his pills. Usually you spend meetings looking like you're enduring root canal. Emily gathered the empty water glass. These were student entrepreneurs, a startup incubator for undergrad tech projects. He wheeled himself to the window. Mrs. Thompson must have accidentally scheduled it. Mrs. Thompson has been out sick for 3 days. He turned to face her. Then, I suppose I have you to thank for cluttering my calendar with student meetings. Emily met his gaze steadily. You turned down 3 venture capital meetings this morning to take this call. Should I cancel the other student sessions I scheduled? The corner of his mouth twitched. How many did you schedule? 2 per week for the next month. She moved toward the door, focusing on assistive technology projects, but I can clear them, leave them. His voice stopped her. But Ms. Lee, yes? The next time you manipulate my schedule, you might want to be less obvious about it. Emily allowed herself a small smile. The next time you pretend to be annoyed about it, you might want to be less obvious about hiding your enthusiasm. She closed the door on his surprised laugh, feeling oddly satisfied. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone to text Liam. How's the circuit board holding up? The response came quickly. Great. Is Mr. Carter there? I had some questions about parallel circuits. Emily stared at the message, realizing with sudden clarity that she wasn't Michael on another call, his voice carrying the same passionate intensity as before. Maybe she thought some boundaries were meant to be redrawn rather than reinforced. She texted back, he's in meetings until 5, but I'm sure he can find time to answer questions during your next visit. After all, she reasoned mentoring was just another form of caregiving, and that at least was still within her job description. No. Michael's refusal echoed through the window. They're displaying pieces from before the accident. It's nothing but misplaced nostalgia. Emily continued her preparations unfazed. The gallery director mentioned new photographers exploring adaptive techniques. She thought you might have to adaptive photography techniques might be more valuable than simply displaying your old work. Michael finally turned to face her. You're not going to let this go, are you? No. She met his gaze. Because you are an electric. You'll need to accompany me, he finally said, for medical support. Of course, she kept her voice neutral, professional. I'll wear something appropriate. 2 hours later they arrived at the gallery. Emily had chosen a simple black dress that walked the line between caregiver and companion. While Michael looked every inch, the successful entrepreneur in his tailored suit, the gallery director rushed to greet them, her enthusiasm almost masking her surprise at Michael's appearance. Mr. Carter, Emily watched Michael's face. The familiar mask of indifference cracked slightly, replaced by genuine interest. Have you tried remote triggering systems? He asked, leaning forward in his chair. I found that certain wireless setups allow for more complex timing. He caught himself glancing at Emily. She pretended to be absorbed in examining a nearby photograph. The evening progressed, and Emily maintained a careful distance, close enough to assist, but far enough to give him space. She watched as Michael gradually engaged with more artists, each conversation becoming more animated than the last. Your perspective on adaptive techniques would be invaluable, one photographer insisted. Would you consider consulting on our accessibility project? Before Michael could refuse, Emily stepped in. I'm sure Mr. Carter's schedule has some availability next month. Shall I have his office contact you? Michael shot her a look that mixed exasperation with something else, something that might have been gratitude. Later, as they waited for their car, he spoke quietly. You're overstepping, Ms. Lee. Yes, she agreed. Would you like me to stop? He was silent for a long moment, watching the city lights reflect off his chair's chrome finish, the consulting project. Make it clear. I don't know her and you do. Catherine's heels clicked across the hardwood floor. I've seen how you look at her, how she looks at you. It's inappropriate. She looks at me like a person, Kate, not a broken investment that needs managing. Emily backed away from the door, but Catherine's next words followed her. She looks at you like she's falling in love with you. And worse, you're letting her. Emily retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she set down the medication. She stared at the pills, organized with professional precision, pain management, muscle relaxants, antispasmodics, a medical routine she could recite in her sleep. When had it become more than that? Miss Lee. She turned to find Catherine in the doorway, elegant in her designer suit. Mrs. Carter. Catherine, please. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I believe we need to talk. About my brother. Vulnerable, though he'd hate me for saying that. I know who he is. Do you? Catherine studied her. Because from where I stand, you're either manipulating him very skillfully or you're in danger of crossing a line that will destroy you both. Catherine's voice was very stopped, trying to fix what can't be fixed. Catherine moved toward the door before someone gets hurt. After she left, Emily mechanically prepared Michael's coffee, adding the precise amount of cream he preferred. Her fingers brushed the piano keys as she passed the living room, and she quickly pulled them away. When she finally entered his study, Michael was staring out the window. You heard. It wasn't a question. Yes, she set down his coffee and medication. And Emily straightened her uniform. Are your sister aware boundaries? Emily, your first meeting is in 20 minutes, Mr. Carter. She stepped back, rebuilding her walls brick by brick. Would you like me to review the agenda with you? The silence that followed felt like a door closing. No, he finally said, his own walls sliding back into place. That will be all Ms. Lee. She nodded and left, each step feeling heavier than the last. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text from your morning routine needs adjustment. Emily announced 3 days after Catherine's visit, reading from her tablet while standing at a carefully measured distance from Michael's desk. The hospital's occupational therapy department suggests increasing your stretching time by 15 minutes. Fine. Michael didn't look up from his laptop. Also, whatever they recommend is fine, Ms. Lee. The formal distance between them had become its own kind of every interaction, now felt scripted, sanitized, stripped of the warmth that had slowly built over the months. Emily pressed on. Dr. Martinez called about your quarterly evaluation. Schedule it whenever. It conflicts with the student mentoring sessions. His fingers stilled on the keyboard. Cancel those. The students are counting on cancel them. He finally looked at her, his face unreadable. That's what you want, isn't it? Professional boundaries. Emily continued to ask to help. He asked to help her. He said, I can help her. Emily continued to ask him to he said, I can help. Emily continued to ask. He said, I can help her. Emily continued to ask. He said, I can help her. Emily continued him to help. He said, I can help her. Emily continued to ask him to it could be a lawsuit. She forced herself to meet his gaze, or a scandal, or just another failed experiment in making you feel whole again. The hurt that flashed across his face made her want to take back the words immediately. Is that what you think this is? He asked quietly. An experiment? I think. Emily took a deep breath. I think it's time for your physical therapy session. Shall I call for the wheelchair van? Michael stared at her for a long moment before turning away. Yes, Ms. Lee. That will be all. She made it to the hallway before her hands started shaking. Her phone buzzed. A text from the hospital's HR department. Reminder, quarterly review of private client boundaries next week. Emily leaned against the wall, letting out a shaky breath. Professional boundaries were supposed to protect everyone involved, so why did maintaining them feel like the cruelest thing she'd ever done? His temperature is 103.2, Emily reported into her phone, pressing a cool cloth to Michael's forehead. Yes, I understand the risks with his condition. No, he's not fully responsive. I need an ambulance now. The pneumonia had come on suddenly. A slight cough in the morning had become labored breathing by evening. Now, at 2 a.m., Michael lay in his bed, skin burning beneath her touch as she monitored his vitals. Stay with me, she murmured, forgetting professional distance in her concern. The ambulance is coming. Just stay with me. His eyes flickered open, unfocused. Emily, I'm here. She checked his pulse again. Too fast, too weak. Cold, he mumbled. That's the fever. She adjusted his blanket. Years of nursing experience, warring with personal fear. Just keep breathing. Nice and slow. His hand found hers. Grip weak, but desperate. Don't leave. I won't. She squeezed back. Protocols forgotten. I'm right here. The paramedics arrived minutes later, efficiently transferring him to a gurney. Emily rattled off his medical history, medications, and vital signs, her professional mask firmly in place, despite her racing heart. Family? One paramedic asked. I'll call his sister. Emily grabbed her phone. I'm his caregiver. I'll follow my car. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors and medical updates. Emily coordinated with doctors, managed Catherine's frantic arrival, and kept Liam updated via text. She didn't allow herself to think about anything except Michael's next breath, his next test result, his next dose of antibiotics. You should go home, Catherine said around hour 14, finding Emily standing guard outside Michael's ICU room. You look exhausted. I'm fine. Emily checked her watch. His next breathing treatment is in 20 minutes. Catherine studied her for a long moment. This isn't in your job description. Everything about his care is in my job description. Is that what you're doing, your job? Emily watched through the window as Michael slept, oxygen mask fogging with each breath. Yes, liar. Catherine's voice was surprisingly gentle. You're in love with him. I'm his caregiver. You can be both. Catherine touched her arm. God knows I fought it. But maybe that's what he needs. Emily finally turned to face her. What are you saying? I'm saying I was wrong. Catherine smiled sadly. And you're still lying to yourself. Before Emily could respond, alarms blared from Michael's room. His oxygen levels were dropping. Emily moved without thinking, rushing to his side as nurses flooded the room. Her hand found his as the medical team worked, and his fingers tightened weakly around hers. I'm here, she whispered, professional boundaries crumbling like sand. I'm right here. Hours later, when his fever finally broke and he opened his eyes, she was still there, still holding his hand. Emily? His voice was hoarse. Shh. She smoothed his hair back. Just rest. Don't go. She thought about protocols and boundaries, about Liam and job security, about all the walls they'd built and broken. "I won't," she promised, and this time she meant more than just a night. Catherine, watching from the doorway, quietly stepped away, pulling out her phone to call the family lawyer. Some boundaries, she realized, were meant to be rewritten. "I hereby tender my resignation," Emily said formally, placing the envelope on Michael's hospital tray. 2 weeks had passed since his admission, and though he was recovering well, the tension between them remained palpable. Michael stared at the envelope without touching it. "When?" "Effective immediately." Emily smoothed her uniform, a gesture that had become more nervous habit than necessity. "I've arranged for a temporary replacement through the agency. She's fully qualified and—" "Stop." He pushed the envelope away. "Why?" "Because I can't be your caregiver anymore." She met his eyes steadily. "Not after everything." The hospital room felt too small suddenly, charged with unspoken words and abandoned pretenses. "And what is everything exactly?" His voice was quiet, but intense. "You know what?" Emily moved to check his a reflexive action she no longer had the right to perform. She forced her hands back to her sides. "I held your hand. You've held my hand before. During transfers, during therapy. Not like that." She turned to face the window. "Not because I was afraid of losing you." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady beep of his heart monitor. "So you're running?" It wasn't a question. "I'm protecting us both." She turned back to him. "I can't be objective anymore. I can't maintain professional distance. I can't—" "Can't what, Emily?" "Care. Can't pretend." The words burst out of her. "I can't pretend I'm just doing my job when I spend every moment wondering if you're really comfortable, if you're truly happy, if there's more I could do to make you smile. I can't pretend I don't notice how your eyes light up when you mentor those students, or how peaceful you look when you're explaining circuits to Liam, or how I'm in love with you." The words stopped her cold. "You can't say that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because it's unprofessional." He wheeled himself closer to her. "I'm not your patient anymore, Emily. You just resigned, remember? It's not that simple. Actually, it is." He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "I love you. Not because you took care of me, but because you saw me, really saw me. Not as a charge or a burden or a broken thing to be fixed. Just me." Emily felt tears threatening. "Michael, I've already spoken with the hospital's ethics board," he continued, "and my lawyers. There's no conflict if you're not my employee. No ethical boundaries being crossed. Just two people who found each other in an unexpected way. And Liam, what about him? He already thinks I'm his personal science tutor." His smile was gentle. "Unless you're worried he'll be disappointed that his circuit-building sessions might become more frequent." Emily laughed despite herself, tears finally spilling over. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? I'm an entrepreneur. Risk assessment is what I do." He tugged her closer. "And you, Emily Lee, are worth every risk." She looked at their joined hands. No longer caregiver and patient. Just a man and a woman on the edge of something new. "I still don't know if this will work," she admitted. "Neither do I." He squeezed her hand. "But I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Wouldn't you?" Emily thought of all the walls they'd built and broken, all the boundaries they'd drawn and crossed. Maybe it was time to draw new ones together. "Yes," she whispered and leaned down to kiss him. "Are you sure about this?" Liam stood in the doorway of Michael's darkroom, watching him adjust camera settings with practice movements. 1 month after his hospital release, the room had transformed from a shrine to his past into a working studio. "About teaching you photography," Michael glanced up from the camera. "Or about dating your mother." Liam considered this, his face serious. "Both, I guess." He wheeled himself back from the workbench. "Come here, let me show you something." Emily watched from the doorway as Michael guided Liam's hands to the camera, showing him how to hold it steady. She'd planned to give them privacy for this moment, but something in their interaction held her transfixed. "See this adapter?" Michael demonstrated the modified trigger mechanism. "I designed it after the accident, but I was too afraid to use it. Fear's funny that way. It makes you forget what you're capable of. Liam adjusted his grip on the "is that why you stopped taking pictures?" Partly. Michael helped him frame a shot. Mostly I was afraid of doing things differently than before. I thought different meant worse, but it doesn't. Liam lowered the camera to look at him. No, his eyes met Emily's in the doorway. Sometimes different just means finding a new way to see things. A better way even. Emily felt her heart tighten as Liam processed this. Her son's analytical mind working through the "is that why you love my mom?" Liam asked suddenly. Because she helped you see things differently? Michael's hands stilled on the camera. I love your mom because she's brave enough to try new things even when they're scary. Like letting her son spend time with her former patient. Ex-patient, Emily corrected, finally entering the room. Current boyfriend. Still weird, Liam declared. But he was smiling. But kind of cool too. Especially if I get to learn photography. Speaking of which, Michael reached for a second camera, this one slightly smaller. This one's yours for practice. Liam's eyes widened. Really? Really? He started explaining the basic settings, but Liam threw his arms around him first, surprising them all. Thank you, he whispered, then pulled back embarrassed. Sorry, I know you're not big on hugs. I'm learning to be, Michael said softly, adjusting his chair. Different, remember? Emily watched them return to the camera, noting how naturally they moved around each other now. Trust, she realized, was like photography. It required patience, practice, and the courage to see things in a new light. Mom, Liam called excitedly, come look at this shot. Emily moved to join them, her hand finding Michael's shoulder as she leaned in to see the photo. His fingers covered hers briefly, a gesture so natural now it barely registered. Beautiful, she said, meaning more than just the photograph. Later, as they watched Liam practicing with his new camera in the garden, Michael spoke quietly. He's not the only one I'm sure about, you know. Emily squeezed his hand. I know. Some pictures, she thought, took time to develop, but when they finally came clear, they were worth every moment of waiting. Is everything ready? Emily adjusted the last photograph on the darkroom wall, now transformed into a makeshift gallery. 6 months had passed since her resignation, each day bringing new definitions of normal. Almost, Michael positioned his wheelchair near the doorway, surveying their work. Liam's bringing the final prints up from the development room. The exhibition was small, family and close friends only, but it represented something larger. Each photograph told part of their story. Liam learning to use his camera, Emily rediscovering the piano, Michael mentoring his students, moments captured not despite their challenges, but because of them. The ethics board wants to interview us, Emily mentioned, straightening a frame. Apparently, we're becoming a case study in professional boundary transitions. Michael laughed. Should I mention how you used to butcher Mozart during bath time? Only if you want to sleep in the guest room. She leaned down to kiss him, still marveling at how natural it felt. Mom! Liam's voice carried up the stairs. Aren't Catherine's here? They shared a look. Catherine's evolution from skeptic to supporter hadn't been easy, but like everything else in their lives, they'd found a way to make it work. Ready? Michael asked, taking her hand. Emily squeezed his fingers for our first public appearance as a real couple. Terrifying. Good thing you're brave. He tugged her down for another kiss. Remember what you told me that first day? About walls? That you had good ones? She smiled against his lips. That I'd seen better? That they were just walls? He pulled back to meet her eyes. You were right. They were just walls. And you didn't break them down. You showed me how to build doors instead. Footsteps on the stairs announced their guest's arrival. Liam led the way proudly, wearing his new camera. Catherine followed along with Michael's medical team, a few close friends, and even Mrs. Thompson. Welcome, Michael addressed a small crowd, his voice steady, to our first family exhibition. Emily watched as their guests moved through the room, examining photographs that chronicled their journey. Liam's first successful portrait. Michael teaching a student to use adapted equipment. Emily at the piano, caught in a moment of pure joy. They're all wondering how we made it work, Michael murmured, pulling her close. Emily watched Liam enthusiastically explaining his photography techniques to Catherine, who listened with genuine interest. We're still figuring that out. Day by day, photograph by photograph, she smiled. Speaking of which, she nodded to Liam, who grinned and raised his camera. Michael pulled Emily onto his lap, both of them laughing as their son captured the moment. Later, after the guests had gone and Liam was asleep, they returned to the darkroom. Michael wheeled to the final photograph, the one they'd taken that first day he'd reopened the room. It's blurry, he noted critically. It's perfect. Emily wrapped her arms around him from behind. It shows exactly where we started and where we're going. She turned him to face her. That's still developing. He smiled, pulling her close. I love you, Ms. Lee. I love you too, Mr. Carter. She kissed him softly. Now, about that Mozart, their laughter echoed through the house. Their house now, a melody sweeter than any concerto. Some things they'd learned didn't need to be captured in photographs. They just needed to be lived, one moment at a time, with hearts brave enough to choose love over fear, growth over safety, and the messy, beautiful reality of building something new together. In the end, it wasn't about breaking boundaries or maintaining them. It was about redrawing them together until they formed not walls but foundations for something stronger than either of them had imagined possible.